reasonable if I'm happy that they're defense. I don't think I'm up for it right now. I'll see if someone else can do it.
Well, I left on my bicycle about 5 p.m. on Wednesday from my dorm. Just kind of felt like going for a ride. So I went up to the top of Cactus Canyon. And I'm not super familiar with the area, so on my way back down, I didn't know where I was going. I was just sort of picking the way to go. Which now, it makes me think that God wanted me to find him there, because there's no other way that I was going to go there. So I was in some deep-ass sand, and I wanted to turn around, but for some reason, I kept going. And I went along, and there was this rock on the ground. And I just drilled it. I went over the handlebars and ended up on the ground. So I got up, and I was just kind of dusting myself off. And I was looking around, and I noticed something, which ended up to be Matt. And he was just lying there by a fence. And I just thought it was a scarecrow. I was like, Halloween's coming up, just thought it was a Halloween gag. So I didn't think much of it. So I got my bike, walked around the fence that was there. It was a buck-type fence. And got closer to him. And I noticed his hair. And that was a major key to me. Noticing it was a human being. It was the hair. Because I just thought it was a dummy. Seriously, I didn't notice the chest going up and down. I just thought it was a dummy, you know? Just thought it was some kind of mechanism. But when I saw hair, well, I knew it was a human being. So I ran to the nearest house. I just ran as fast as I could, and I called the police.
I responded to the call. Officer Reggie Fluty. When I got there, at first the only thing I could see was partially somebody's feet, and I got out of my vehicle and raced over. I seen there could be a young man, 13, 14 years old, because he was so tiny, laying there on his back, and he was tied to the bottom end of the hole. I did the best I could. The gentleman laying on the ground, Matthew Shepard, he was covered in dry blood all over his head. There was blood underneath him, he was barely breathing. He was doing the best he could. I was going to breathe for him, and I couldn't get his mouth open. His mouth wouldn't open. He was covered, like I said, partially dry blood, and blood all over his head. The only place who not had any blood on him, on his face, was what appeared to be where he had been crying down his face. His head was distorted, you know, it did not look normal. It looked as if he had a real harsh head wound.
I was working the emergency room the night Matthew Shepard was brought in. And I don't think that any of us can remember seeing a patient in that condition for a long time. Those of us who worked in big city hospitals have seen this. But we have some people here who have not worked in a big city hospital. And it's not something you expect here. You expect it? You expect to see this from a car going downhill at 80 miles an hour. You expect to see gross injuries from something like that. This horrendous, terrible thing. But you don't expect to see that from
was nothing I could do. I mean, if there was anything I could have done to help him, I would have done it. But there was nothing. And I was yelling at him at the top of my lungs, trying to get something out of him, like, hey, wake up, hello. But he didn't move. He didn't flinch. He didn't anything.
He was tied to the fence. His hands were thumbs out on the cuffing position. The way we handcuffed him, he was bound with a real thin white rope. It went around the bottom and pulled about 4 inches off the ground. His shoes were missing. He was tied extremely tight, so I got out my boot knife and I tried to slip it in between the rope and his wrist. I had to be extremely careful not to harm Matthew any further.
Your first thought is, well, certainly you'd like to think that it's somebody from out of town who comes through and beats somebody. I mean, things like this happen. You know, shit happens. And it happens in Laramie. But when somebody is beaten repeatedly, well, certainly, this is something that offends us. I think that's a good word. It offends us.
He was bound so tight. I finally got my knife through there. I'm sorry. We rolled him onto his left side. When we did that, he quit breathing. Immediately, I put him back on his back. That was just enough of an adjustment. Gave me just enough room to cut him free there. I seen the EMS unit trying to get to location. Once they got there, we put a neck collar on him, placed him on a backboard and scooted him from underneath the fence. Then Rob drove the ambulance to Iverson Hospital's emergency room.
Now, the strange thing is, about 20 minutes before Matthew came in, Aaron McKinney was brought in by his girlfriend. Now, I guess he'd gotten into a fight later on that night back in town. So I'm working on Aaron, and the ambulance comes in with Matthew. And at this point, I don't know that there's connection at all. So I tell Aaron to wait, and I go treat Matthew. And so there's Aaron in one room of the ER, and then there's Matthew in another room, just 2 doors down. Now, as soon as we saw Matthew, it was very obvious that his care was beyond our capabilities. Called the neurosurgeon at Fuji Valley, and he was on the road in an hour and 15 minutes, I think.
They showed me a picture. Days later, I saw a picture of Matthew. I would have never recognized him.
Then 2 days later, I found out the connection, and I was very struck. There were 2 kids. They were both my patients, and there were 2 kids. I took care of both of them.